Your mom is a loser. Definitely not sophisticated enough for this school. The whisper came from somewhere behind me in the back row of the auditorium, spoken just loud enough for the surrounding cluster of 17-year-old boys to hear and snicker about. I stood in the shadow of the heavy burgundy curtains that framed the stage at Ashford Academy, watching my stepson Marcus shuffle uncomfortably in his seat, and I had to work very hard not to smile. The boy who'd made the comment, a junior named Trevor, whose father ran a hedge fund and whose entire worldview was constructed around the premise that inherited wealth was equivalent to inherited wisdom, had no idea who I was. He'd seen a woman in a simple black dress, her hair pulled back in a practical bun, carrying a leather briefcase that cost more than his semester's tuition, and he'd made an instant assessment. Not important enough to know. Not polished enough to belong. Not the right kind of mother for a boy who attended one of the most prestigious preparatory schools on the East Coast. I'd learned a long time ago that this was how power worked in spaces like Ashford Academy. It announced itself loudly, performed itself publicly, and demanded immediate recognition. Which meant that real power looked like silence. Like invisibility. Like a woman standing at the edge of a room, taking notes, observing everything. The assembly was starting. I could hear the shuffle of 800 students, parents, and faculty members settling into their seats. The dean of students, a man named Dr. Hartwell, was walking toward the podium. Marcus had asked me to attend his end-of-year assembly, and I'd said yes, even though attending meant enduring exactly this kind of conversation. Good morning, Dr. Hartwell's voice boomed across the auditorium. Before we begin today's student achievement celebration, we have a special address from our headmaster. She's been leading Ashford Academy for the past 4 years, and under her leadership, our institution has achieved remarkable success. Please join me in welcoming Headmaster Eleanor Blackwell. I stepped out from the wings of the stage and walked toward the podium, my footsteps deliberate and measured. The murmuring in the audience shifted to silence. I could feel every eye in the room turning toward me. I looked out at the crowd, at the wealthy parents checking their phones, at the boarding students slouching in their seats, at my stepson Marcus, whose face had gone through a series of emotions in approximately 3 seconds. Confusion, then dawning comprehension, then absolute, unmistakable embarrassment. Behind me, I could practically feel Trevor's face draining of color. I'd met Marcus's father, James, 3 years ago at a fundraiser for educational technology. He was a widower whose wife had died when Marcus was 8, and he'd been raising his son alone ever since. He was intelligent, kind, and utterly convinced that his wealth and professional success entitled him to make most of the decisions in his personal life. When I told him I was the headmaster of Ashford Academy, one of the most prestigious preparatory schools in the country, he'd laughed. He'd actually laughed, as if I'd made a joke. You can't be the headmaster of Ashford, he'd said. The headmaster at Ashford is. Well, I'm not sure who it is, actually. But it's someone important. It's me, I'd said simply. I've been the headmaster for 2 years. Before that, I was the director of admissions at Phillips Exeter. Before that, I was an administrator at St. Paul's. He hadn't believed me until I showed him my business card. Even then, he'd seemed confused, as if leadership of a major preparatory institution should look different than the way I looked. Should perform differently than the way I performed. Should announce itself louder. But that was the thing about real power. It didn't have to perform for anyone. Now, standing at the podium looking out at 800 people who'd just realized that the woman they'd dismissed was actually running the entire institution, I paused for just a moment. Good morning, I said, my voice calm and measured. For those who don't know me, I'm Eleanor Blackwell. I've been the headmaster of Ashford Academy for 4 years now, and what I want to talk about this morning is something that we don't talk about enough in spaces like this. I looked directly at Marcus, who was trying very hard to disappear into his seat. We don't talk about the assumptions we make about power, I continued. We assume that power announces itself. We assume that power looks a certain way, dresses a certain way, performs itself in ways that we recognize. And when power shows up differently than we expect, we often don't recognize it at all. I could see parents exchanging glances. I could see faculty members nodding. I could see the exact moment when Trevor realized what was happening. I became an educator because I believed, and still believe, that education is the most powerful tool for upward mobility that exists in this country, I said. Not because my background is privileged. Not because my family had money or connections. I became an educator because I worked my way through a state university. Because I was a first-generation college student. Because I believed that if I could give other people, particularly young people from backgrounds like mine, access to the kind of education that Ashford provides, I could change their lives. The room was completely silent now. When I became the headmaster of this institution 4 years ago, we had a diversity problem, I continued. 78% of our student body came from families with a net worth over $5 million. Our scholarship program was virtually non-existent. Our faculty was overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly male. And we were operating under the assumption that Ashford's value came from the exclusivity of who we admitted, rather than from the quality of the education we provided. I paused, letting that sink in. I changed that. We now admit 50 students annually on full scholarship. Students from backgrounds that would have been completely excluded from Ashford 5 years ago. Our faculty has expanded to include women, people of color, and scholars from non-traditional academic backgrounds. Our student body is now more than 40% non-white, more than 50% first-generation college-bound students, and more diverse in economic background than at any point in our 100-year history. I looked directly at Marcus again. And our academic rankings have improved, I finished. Our SAT scores have increased. Our college placement rate has increased. Our publication record has increased. Our athletic rankings have improved. Everything that matters has improved. Not because we became more exclusive, but because we became less so. The assembly continued with student recognitions and achievement awards, but I could feel the energy in the room had fundamentally shifted. Parents were whispering to each other. Students were looking at me with expressions that ranged from admiration to shock to regret. After the assembly ended, I walked back to my office in the administrative building. Marcus caught up with me in the hallway. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice a mixture of embarrassment and anger. "Why did you let me think you were just—" "I don't know. Some woman my dad was dating. Because I wanted to know who you were when you didn't know who I was," I said simply. We walked into my office and I closed the door. "I wanted to see how you treated me, how you talked about me, what you assumed about me based on appearance and social position." "I treated you fine," Marcus said defensively. "You did," I agreed. "But you were ashamed of me. You didn't introduce me to your friends. You didn't tell people that your father was dating someone who worked in education. You were comfortable with your father dating a woman, as long as that woman occupied a certain social position that wouldn't embarrass you in front of your peers." Marcus was quiet. "Your friends made a comment in the auditorium," I continued. "They said I didn't belong here, that I wasn't sophisticated enough, that I was a loser. And the funny thing is, that didn't hurt my feelings. But what did give me pause was that you didn't defend me. You didn't say anything. You just sat there and accepted their judgment as valid." "I didn't hear them," Marcus said. "Yes, you did," I said gently. "You heard them. You just didn't want to cause conflict with them by defending me. That's a choice you made." Marcus sat down in one of the leather chairs across from my desk. "I'm sorry," he said. "I was an asshole." "You're 17, I said. "Being an asshole is kind of your job. But now you understand something important. Assumptions about people based on appearance are usually wrong. The woman you were ashamed to introduce to your friends is the woman running your school. The woman your friends dismissed as a loser has a PhD from Yale, a master's degree from Harvard, and has transformed one of the most prestigious educational institutions in the country. The woman they decided didn't belong here is the reason they have the opportunity to be here at all." James picked me up from school that evening. We went to dinner at a restaurant in Boston, one of those places with white tablecloths and wine pairings, and the kind of service that anticipated every need before you expressed it. "Marcus told me what happened at the assembly," he said, once we were seated. "He said you deliberately let him and his friends make assumptions about you before revealing who you actually were." "I didn't deliberately do anything," I said. "I attended his assembly as his stepmother. I happened to be the headmaster. Those things just coexisted. But you could have told him. You could have told all of them." "I could have," I agreed. "But I was interested in an experiment." "What experiment?" James asked. "I wanted to know if people would treat me differently once they knew my title. I wanted to see if the assumption of power would change their behavior toward me." Spoiler alert, it did. The moment Dr. Hartwell introduced me as the headmaster, I could feel the shift in the room. Suddenly I was worth listening to. Suddenly I was sophisticated enough. Suddenly I belonged. "So what does that tell you?" James asked. "It tells me that power is performed by other people," I said. "It's not inherent to anything. It's a social construction. I'm the same person whether I'm introduced as James's girlfriend or as Headmaster Eleanor Blackwell. But other people's perception of me, their respect for me, their willingness to listen to me, changes based on what title they assign to me. James was quiet for a moment. That must be exhausting, he said finally. Living in a world where you have to constantly manage other people's perceptions of you. It is, I said, which is why I've stopped doing it. I don't manage people's perceptions anymore. I just live my life authentically and let people draw their own conclusions. If they want to dismiss me because I'm a woman in a black dress instead of a woman in administrative formal wear, that's their choice. But they usually regret it eventually. Over the next several weeks, I watched Marcus navigate a new understanding of who I was. He became protective, almost possessive, of his connection to me. He told his friends about my background. He talked about my accomplishments. He became, in many ways, my public relations department within the student body. It was sweet and also unnecessary. I didn't need him to defend me or promote me. But it was also a sign that he'd understood the lesson I was trying to teach. That people deserve to be seen for what they actually are, not for what you assume them to be based on surface-level observations. 3 months after the assembly, I was invited to speak at a conference on educational leadership at Harvard. The keynote title was The Power of Invisibility: How Women Lead in Systems Designed to Overlook Them. I stood on the stage at Harvard Sanders Theater and told the story of the assembly. I told the story of my stepson's friends. I told the story of a woman standing at the edge of a room, invisible, while everyone assumed she was unimportant. The most powerful women I know, I said to the audience, are not the ones who announce their power. They're the ones who quietly understand how systems work. They're the ones who observe before they act. They're the ones who don't require external validation to know their worth. I paused. And they're the ones who are absolutely fine with other people discovering who they are after they've already miscalculated. I finished. Because by that point, it's too late. The misconception has already solidified into regret. A year after the assembly, Ashford Academy had its most successful academic year on record. Our test scores ranked in the top 3% nationally. Our college placement rate reached 98%. And our diversity initiative had become a model for other preparatory institutions across the country. I was featured in The Atlantic as one of 10 leaders reshaping American education. I was invited to serve on the board of the American Association of Independent Schools. I was offered the position of Dean of Admissions at Princeton, which I declined because I wasn't finished transforming Ashford yet. Marcus graduated with honors. He was accepted to Yale and Stanford and Harvard, and he chose Yale, deciding to follow in his stepmother's footsteps into education. His first speech to the Yale student body, given during freshman orientation, was about assumptions and power and the dangers of dismissing people based on appearance. He cited his stepmother without naming her, but everyone in the room understood who he was talking about. That night, I received a text from him. I finally understand. Thank you for the lesson. I smiled, because the truth was simple. I'd never been trying to teach him a lesson about respecting authority or understanding that appearances were deceiving. I'd been trying to teach him something far more important. I'd been trying to teach him that real power was quiet, that real strength didn't announce itself, that the most dangerous women in any room were often the ones that nobody was paying attention to. I'd been trying to teach him that I was one of those women. And now, finally, he understood. 5 years after I'd become headmaster, Ashford Academy was ranked among the top 5 preparatory schools in the country. Our endowment had grown by 300%, fueled by major donors who believed in our mission of accessible excellence. Our scholarship program provided full 4-year scholarships to over 200 students who would have been completely excluded from Ashford in the old regime. I had transformed the institution not by announcing my vision loudly, but by quietly, systematically, methodically implementing it. I had never demanded respect. I had simply done the work and let my results speak for themselves. And in the process, I'd taught my stepson an invaluable lesson. That power isn't about how you dress or how you perform or what assumptions people make about you based on surface-level observations. Power is about knowing exactly who you are and being absolutely unconcerned with whether anyone else recognizes it. That was the real sophistication. And Trevor and his friends would spend the rest of their lives trying to understand it.